you ever thought to yourself, I wish I'd never been born? After all, if you had never been born, you would not be victim to all the woes and calamities that life entails. And since birth, the dawn of your existence, entails all of the sufferings that you are inevitably prey to during life, perhaps it could even be said that existence itself is the ultimate horror. Well, that definitely is Thomas Ligotti's standpoint in his philosophical nonfiction book, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, a Contrivance of Horror. So, I've been aware of this book for some time, and I really wanted to read it because, Thomas Ligotti is a very highly renowned author. He is one of only two living people, I believe, to be published by under the Penguin Classics line of books. The other one being, oddly enough, Morrissey, and I don't really think that should have ever happened. But he is incredibly acclaimed in the horror community, and his stories are a natural descendant, if you will, I think, of H.P. Lovecraft's work. They are cosmic in nature, and they are, by all accounts, bleak as hell. But I wanted to read this book because this was his stance on life, the universe, and everything. This was him laying it out in how he sees things. And spoiler alert, it is not a very cheery outlook. However, that is not to say that it is incorrect. Now, I want to say right now, to preface what follows, by saying that I think that anyone who reads this book should probably approach it with a healthy a healthy dose of a pinch of salt, if you will. That is not to say that the content of this book is disreputable, or that a lot of it is really even up for debate. But with a lot of people, if they go into this, I just don't know how well people might react to this. I think anytime you read a work of philosophy or something whose goal is to change the way you look at things, I think it's only fitting that you approach it with that pinch of salt, with a healthy degree of skepticism, because you don't want to just be bowled over by any least thing that you read, because that's not generally how you want to, go about living. However, so I do want to preface this by saying that I think that people should approach this book in a manner that doesn't do them harm when they read it, because this book is, depending on how familiar or unfamiliar you are with some of the concepts, this could be really off-putting if you're not really down for the kind of wisdom that Thomas Ligotti is dropping in this book. I personally largely was. A lot of the viewpoints that he puts forward in this book, I had already aligned myself with to some degree, such as antinatalism. That is a big theme in this book. That's why I opened the video with the question, do you wish you'd never been born? Antinatalism is kind of the underlying framework of this book, and I had already subscribed to that philosophy a long time ago, although not for the same reasons that Ligotti does, but I'm not going to go into that here because it would be way too time consuming to explain in this review video. But a lot of the concepts that Ligotti is expounding upon, I'd already kind of agreed with, whether I knew them or not. I did not really consider myself a pessimist until I read this book, but I guess I really do kind of fit the bill, because the way that I look at things kind of does match up to a large degree with the way that Thomas Ligotti looks at things, but once again, for different reasons, I think. But anyway, I'm not going to go into my personal beliefs here. That is just to say that I went into this book largely kind of already sold on some of the stuff that it discusses, but for people who aren't, I would just reiterate that you might want to approach this just with, in a healthy manner, because I don't think this is something that a lot of people would want to just be, you know, dive off into and wholeheartedly endorse, even though because it sounds, legitimate, which I mean, a lot of it is inarguably legitimate, but at the end of the day, this is subjective, okay? This is just a way of looking at life, as most philosophies are, and you don't have to endorse it. Ligotti even tells you numerous times throughout this book, this is just his opinion, this is the way he sees things, and these are the reasons why he sees things this way. And once again, even though a lot of the points that he makes I do kind of agree with, it's for different reasons, which I'm not going to elucidate on here. But people who aren't in agreement or may be kind of shocked and appalled a little bit by some of the stuff he puts down in this book. But what is, I suppose that would be a good point to segue into what the conspiracy against the human race is actually about. Well, as I said, it is a work of philosophical nonfiction which deals largely with the concepts of philosophical pessimism, and antinatalism and horror, and the kind of the foundations of supernatural horror or cosmic horror in our culture, in our fictions and such. This work is a very, despite being only, despite being barely over 200 pages in length, this is a very broad and far-reaching work. It is something of a synthesis of philosophy, science, in particular neuroscience, and literary analysis. And I'm down with all that stuff. And so this was, a no-brainer for me to kind of read because I'm interested in mainly the literary analysis. And oddly enough, that is the area of the book that I thought was the most lacking. But this book just kind of illustrates the way that Thomas Ligotti looks at things. He is a devout pessimist and antinatalist. And while I knew that I shared the second thing, I didn't know that I shared the former thing with him, but I guess I do because I kind of fit the bill with what the book says. But once again, different reasoning. But these are philosophical concepts which a lot of people may not really be that familiar with. But if you are, then it's just a great exploration of these things. And let me tell you, this book is written phenomenally. Okay, I don't really read that much nonfiction because with me, I'm really looking for great characters, and this doesn't have characters in it because it's a nonfiction piece, and it's not a memoir or anything. Great writing and great images and stuff, and nonfiction doesn't generally concern itself too much with that, but this book did, at least in terms of the writing. This book was magnificently written. Thomas Ligotti's prose in this was breathtaking at times. His word choice, the way that he elucidates these points was beyond eloquent. And so I really have to give this book a ringing endorsement on that level. To rate this book, I myself would probably give this an A. But then again, this is probably the most subjective thing that I've ever reviewed on here because this is just a way of looking at life, and a lot of other people, the majority of the human race, will not share the viewpoints put forward in this book, and that's okay. I mean, reality is an objective experience that we all experience, but our assessments of it are entirely our own. And this is just Thomas Ligotti's assessment of it, of which a lot of it I do share, but that is not to say that anyone else out there necessarily will or has to. And so once again, I would approach this in a healthy manner, and a manner open to, with a manner of open-mindedness, but also a little bit of skepticism as well. The central metaphor of this book, which I thought was excellently done, is the concept of puppetry. In the opening introduction of the book, he paints a pretty vivid metaphor of human puppets. Now, a puppet, as we know, is a toy which is constructed in the likeness of a human. They have no autonomy. They do not even really, they're not alive. They only move and mimic human behaviors due to people pulling their strings. And I didn't really know where he was going with this at the onset, but by the end of the book, he makes it very, very abundantly clear that humans are puppets. And this is the thing where I said a lot of this book is, the majority of this book is subjective, because again, this is just a way of looking at things. But the point that he makes about humans being basically toys, cosmic, cosmic toys dancing at the end of strings, as bleak and kind of edgelord-ish as that sounds, it's kind of solid because we like to, in especially his deconstruction of the notion of selfhood. When you really analyze yourself, you have to ask yourself, what are you? You are a created being. Now, whether you think that you are created by intelligent design or just random chance, that's entirely up to you. But the fact remains that you are a created being. You did not create yourself. Therefore, from the moment of your birth, you have no real control over what you are in a physical sense. And as many would argue, in a psychological sense as well, because there's the real meat of the book in the center of it is a deconstruction of the notion of the self. That what we think of it when we, you know, look at each other as different individuals, we're really just looking at different experiences and different memories and behavioral patterns. What you are as a person is largely just made up of physical factors and social experiences. The concept of what you are is basically just an amalgamation of everything that you've been through, kind of. As an example, um, say that you, as a child, are, you know, are frightened by something. Say that you're afraid of spiders as a child. So you grow up to be a person that is frightened of spiders. That becomes yourself because it's not immutable. It is not this unchanging thing. You very well could have just been a person who was not afraid of spiders, but the fact remains that you grew up to become a person who is afraid of spiders. And so yourself was changed. It is this ever changing thing that is not set in stone or defined concretely at your birth. And so, again, the picture that this book paints just grows ever more bleak as it goes on. Uh, and this book, I don't really expect a lot out of nonfiction in terms of emotional reactions, unless it's like, um, Into the Wild or something like that, or The Diary of Anne Frank. If it's a memoir or something like that, I can expect that. But with just treatises on things, people exploring subjects, you're really not going to get much normally in terms of emotional reactions. But oh boy, do you with the conspiracy against the human race. This book, it will have you shook at the end if you're not really prepared for the kind of content which he is laying down, because it is so bleak, it is so hopeless, it is so desolate in its outlook on everything that a lot of people may be kind of knocked, taken aback, knocked over a little bit, because Ligotti's ultimate thesis of the book is that existence is the ultimate horror because we as humans are conscious of our own existence. And now, a lot, that's not that he's far from the first person to say that. Um, and it would be beyond my ability to explain all of his reasoning in this video. If you want to know that, just go read the book. But that is the central gist, is that the simple fact of existence is the ultimate horror because you did not choose to exist. Uh, your existence was predetermined by outside factors, namely your parents, creating you. And this is main leads into the main argument for antinatalism, that it is more, well, he his argument regarding antinatalism in this book is largely drawn from other sources, such as the book Better Never to Have Been, or Better to Have Never Been. I can't remember the exact title, but where it explains that morally and ethically, maybe creating other human beings is not the best course of action in a compassionate sense, um, because the creation of of another person, having a child, having a baby, is always a selfish act, and that is basically inarguable. When you have a child because A, you want to have a child, or B, because you didn't care enough to prevent that from happening. The fact remains that that child has no say in their own coming about. They don't get to decide whether they actually want to be born, whether they want to enter this world and all the myriad atrocities and horrors that it contains. They don't get to decide that. You decide that. And that is why it is always a selfish act to create more life, because life is selfish. Thomas Ligotti is writing from a very a 100% hardcore materialistic, atheistic viewpoint. The way that he views humanity is basically just meat puppets manufactured by nature to be eviscerated in the grinder of life. His view of humans as merely highly advanced animals, uh, as products of entirely natural origin, means that we are programmed biologically to perpetuate our species, no different than dogs or cats or birds or anything else. And that the few among us who who elect not to do that, or do that because of our advanced consciousness, which is why he paints humanity as a literal paradox. We are creatures that exist that are consciously aware that we probably shouldn't. And that is really just, again, a lot of people who aren't prepared for that kind of thing might just be kind of gobsmacked by that logic, or think that that's insane. But when you really think about it, it's pretty bulletproof, I would say. Um, so, yeah, and again, I don't really like to talk about my own beliefs that much on here, but I have considered myself an antinatalist for uh, quite some time, but once again, for different reasoning than Ligotti. And I'm not at all, I would never ever dream of trying to, uh, shame anybody out there, the majority of the human race who has children. I would never dream of doing that, because, as Thomas Ligotti says in this book, we're all just puppets basically of our own design, which was not our creation. And um, the concept of antinatalism got a real boost in popularity back in 2014 or 15 with the HBO show True Detective, because that was a major theme in that show, and that show was a primary source of inspiration for that show, or at least the premiere season of that show was this book, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. It wore its influences so proudly on its sleeves that a lot of people said that it was plagiaristic by nature. And but that is just to say that Ligotti is a person who has really thought about life and existence. He has looked on the naked face of creation and has recoiled in horror at what he has seen. That is not at all to say that he is smarter than anyone out there, or that if you agree with what he puts forward in this book, that you are necessarily superior. Not at all, because as he reiterates time and time again throughout this book, this is all just subjective. Uh, I mean, there are things, once again, that he outlines, such as the nature of humanity, and that we are programmed to do certain things whether we like it or not, but yet we are conscious enough to recognize our own programming. That's not really an arguable point, but it's just your viewpoint on how you think that is, whether you think that's such a good thing or such a horrendously bad thing as he does, and as I kind of do a little bit to, myself. But uh, again, this was an amazing read. It was absolutely fantastic. This is probably the best nonfiction book I have ever read, if only because the writing was so just astounding. The writing in this book was of the highest literary caliber. Like, this was a literarily written nonfiction book, and I didn't expect that because I never do out of nonfiction. But I loved it. The content of this book was bleak as all hell, but I mean, I was kind of prepared for it because of some of it, or a lot of it, I kind of was already vibing with a little bit. But again, I'm not all. The last thing I'd ever want to do is try to put myself on some kind of pedestal and say I'm superior to all the people who mindlessly procreate or whatever. Oh, that was a bad way to put it, but you get my gist. As I said at the beginning, I think it is best to approach this book, and really this kind of book, any work of philosophy whose aim is to change the way you look at things. The best way to approach it is open-mindedly, but also kind of another paradox. Kind of approach it open-mindedly, but also a little bit guardedly, because you don't want to just jump on every bandwagon that passes by. And this right here is one of the most extreme bandwagons that I think you could possibly jump on. Uh, Again, the Ligotti's uh, position that simple existence is the ultimate horror, simply because you exist and you can't control that, is really, really uh, going to be kind of foreign to a lot of people. But I think it does touch on something, uh, some deeper truth. I think that's probably why Hamlet's famous and highly cliched soliloquy rings so true today. Is it better to be or not to be? To be or not to be, that is the question. That really is the question. Is it better to be or not to be? And with Thomas Ligotti, the answer is an resounding no. And this book really does a great job of backing that up. But one thing that I've noticed is that, with the most of the books that I read, I generally like to get a good bead on what other people think of them as well. So I went on Goodreads and looked at this book. By the way, it has a remarkably high rating on that site for the kind of content that it contains. And really, it's kind of odd that everybody on that site rated it like 4 and 5 stars, and they were like, he's dropping so much truth with this. It is so profound and, real, and it so gets to the heart of things. And yet, how many of people are going to say that and then not really live accordingly? Because this is not the kind of book that you read or that you should read if you buy into it. This is my point. If you buy into what he is putting forth in this book, this is not the kind of thing that you would read and then give a ringing 5-star endorsement on Goodreads, and then go on having children and doing, perpetuating the misery. It just kind of strikes me as odd how many people on that site are like, yeah, this guy sees things. This guy sees things how it really is. You need to read this book because it'll show you the horrors of life. And yet, how many of those people are going to go on to have families and do the exact same things that this book argues against? And once again, I'm not saying that you have to buy into this book, but I think if it is something that strikes you as true, as strikes you as having a really accurate bead on how things really work in life, in existence, then you might want to consider, uh, kind of adhering to some of these strictures that it endorses, because that would really be the only logical thing to do. But again, I'm not at all trying to argue that you have to see things the way this book sees them, um, or that he is necessarily right, because this is largely a matter of opinion. But what I am saying is that this book is amazingly written. It is incredibly thorough, and it covers a broad spectrum of fields and disciplines. And I think that a lot of people could get some good out of reading it, even if they don't really agree with everything in it. So, yeah, that is The Conspiracy Against the Human Race by Thomas Ligotti. Have you read The Conspiracy Against the Human Race? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said here today. And if you haven't read it, I could definitely recommend it, but once again, you need to approach it in a certain way. Don't go into it rabidly saying, yes, I want to believe, yes, sensei, I want to believe as you say, but also don't just scoff at it and say this is some crazy ass crap, because I don't think it's either. This is just a way of looking at life, and it's, I guess, no more right or wrong than any other way of looking at life. But you get the point by now. So, as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, please remember to like, subscribe, help the channel out a little bit, and until next time, peace.